welcome to episode 4 of Off the Sidelines Property Podcast, the most popping podcast in Central West and Sydney at the moment. We've got my co-host here, Onus.
Yo. Hi guys, thanks for joining us again on another episode. It's always a pleasure to provide value to our audience and people looking to purchase property in this current market climate. And we have our solicitor that we work closely with, Renee Roumanos of Vizzini Lawyers. So Renee, I'll get you to introduce yourself to the people and tell us a bit about you and what you do.
Thank you for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here. I've been watching this show and what an honour it is to be on the show. A little bit about myself. I'm a solicitor. I work for Vizzini Lawyers. We deal with a variety of areas of law, but predominantly conveyancing, which is obviously a hot topic over here. I've been working in the legal game for nearly a decade.
Wow.
And I've got a variety of experience in various areas of law. And obviously one of my favourites is property.
That's awesome. And thanks for that introduction. So Renee, I'll just kick us off by just asking you, really, why would someone need a conveyancer during that property transaction process, and what services do you provide, just so our audience can get a bit of a better understanding? Because I know that some people want to do it themselves and there are DIY kits out there for conveyancing, but just tell us a bit more about what you do in that A to Z process.
Absolutely. Really great question, because I have people asking exactly that. Can I do it myself? And I would absolutely say no, you cannot. The reason being is there is so much legal, I'll say stuff, but really important, valuable information that's in those contracts for sale. And a simple lay person would not be able to pinpoint those things that make that contract so important. And should a lay person pick up that contract and sign it, they are then bound by the terms of that contract. So in utmost importance, having a solicitor or a conveyancer back you when you are purchasing a property is number one. And the reason I say that is because this process is significant. Buying a property is one of the most significant things people do. So you should do it right. Obviously, it's important to have the right people in your corner, such as a buyer's agent, a broker, and obviously a lawyer. And the reason I say that is because negotiating those terms of the contract and getting that contract across the line to settlement, that entire process requires such due skill and diligence, and there are so many nitty-gritty things that happen in that entire process, which I'll go into in a moment. But not having the skills to do that would be one of the biggest risks that a purchaser can face. And, this day and age, every property you look at is, at that $1 million mark. So would you really risk your $1 million for $1,000 solicitor, or for someone that's, you pay a couple grand for a solicitor or a conveyancer? You would never, ever, and I would never want anyone to risk, the great risk that comes along with it if you don't have the right person backing you.
Sure.
So you asked earlier what the difference is between a lawyer and a conveyancer.
Yeah, that's right, because I just feel like they're both similar, like they do exactly the same thing, right?
Absolutely.
So then why would someone want to use a conveyancer or a solicitor? So then there must be some kind of difference.
Absolutely. There definitely is. A law degree is one of them.
There you go.
To put things simply, a conveyancer can deal with the simple transaction of the purchase or the sale of property. That's what they can deal with, and that is what they're restricted to deal with. Right. Should an issue come up, should a matter be complex, should something should anything come up in that process whereby legal proceedings need to be commenced or there's a dispute, the conveyancer is not the person that could help you with those things because they're so limited to their capacity. They can't really give legal advice on anything other than that transaction, and they won't be able to commence legal proceedings should that arise. Whereas a solicitor, such as myself or any other solicitor in New South Wales, will be able to advise on a variety of areas of law which may impact that particular contract. And they will be able to deal with any dispute should it arise. So in my personal opinion, I would always say have a solicitor back you, regardless if you think your matter's complex or if it's really simple, purely for risk analysis and minimizing the risk as much as you can.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's awesome. And in terms of examples of risk, because me personally, I haven't encountered any risk thus far. But what could typically happen in a transaction whereby a seller or buyer would be in a fortunate position that they have actually used a solicitor?
Really good question. I think in those circumstances, I've had clients who have had really complex matters come up and they're buying property in the name of a trust or they're buying property in the name of a company. And in that process, things may arise where you need a solicitor to give you independent legal advice. That is one of the most basic areas that a conveyancer can't actually help you with, and they would then need to refer you on to a solicitor to help get that transaction across the line. There are other circumstances, and I'll use COVID as an excuse because COVID's been a really big thing lately. I've had one matter whereby my clients couldn't settle because they had COVID.
Right.
They had COVID. They couldn't settle. They couldn't continue with the contract. They couldn't get to the bank to sign loan documents. Things were getting really messy, and the vendors in that matter were lodging what's called a notice to produce, which is forcing their hand. And if you don't settle within 14 days of that particular notice to, complete being lodged or being served, you could risk your deposit. So in those circumstances, I had to really negotiate and push on the vendor solicitor to allow flexible terms because our clients could not settle on the contract on the due date. And obviously standard penalties apply, but we were able to negotiate with those vendor solicitors and then basically get them to come to the table and be a little bit more flexible with us. And obviously good negotiation skills go a long way in circumstances where issues like that appear. And no one would ever want their clients risking a deposit because that deposit's already taken them 5 years to save up, as it does.
That's right.
So having the right person be able to negotiate the right terms in your corner and be able to really scrutinise in the legislation and find little ways to get away or get around things is super important.
And how much was their deposit?
From memory, it was a 5% on $1 million property.
Wow, that's huge. So they could have lost $50,000.
They could have, but we have,
You saved them $50,000.
I'd like to think so.
Okay.
That's awesome. So that's the benefits of using obviously a solicitor opposed to trying to DIY yourself or use a conveyancer. But also you can act in any state in Australia as well, being a solicitor, can't you?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So I act in all states of Australia.
Yep.
That's right. And I would never, and I don't want this to come across as though I would ever downplay a conveyancer because they are wonderful at what they do, but they strictly deal with the purchase and the sale of property, and their knowledge is not outside of that scope at all. But I'm totally against any DIY or do-it-yourself conveyancing. Don't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
At a minimum, find someone cheaper if you can't afford, a solicitor, but definitely don't do it yourself. It's not an area you want to do it yourself.
For sure.
100% don't do it yourself. If you're on a budget, look for a conveyancer. If you want quality, and then look for a solicitor.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Perfect.
Okay, that's nice.
And in terms of any recent success stories, have you got any interesting or fun or exciting or heartwarming stories you can talk about from a solicitor's point of view? Because I'm sure you deal with a lot of rubbish, but you'd also have some fun, exciting things that you get to do and help people in life and make them feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you're trying to press on me to tell a story that I told you about before this podcast. Heartwarming story. I've got a particular client who's in her 90s and she's selling her property and then moving into a retirement village, and I'm assisting her with that second transaction as well.
Yep.
And selling her family home of some 50 years is such a scary, and it is exciting, but it's so nerve-wracking for her. And every time I speak to her, I can hear the nerves in her voice. And I said to her, don't worry, the auction's this Saturday. I said, I will come to the auction.
Yep.
I will come, I will hold your hand, and I will be there. And we will make sure it all goes, across the line smoothly. And I will be there to give you advice if something goes sour. So don't worry. And that's obviously just a little token about myself. I like to really go out of my way for my clients. Not saying I do that all the time because I couldn't. But I try and extend myself to be the solicitor my clients need me to be in those circumstances.
Yeah, essentially like a chameleon, adapt to the situation. If they need you to do that for them, then you'll do it.
Absolutely.
That's customer service 101. I like it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan, for getting that lovely story out of Renee. But yeah, I guess I just want to get back into it and just squeeze as much value and good stuff out of Renee whilst we've got you here. So Renee, typically people buy a house or they buy an apartment or a townhouse. So would you just give us a nice overview of what to look out for? Because I know that with townhouses or apartments, there's a thing or a scheme called Strata, and that's not always easy to navigate. Whereas purchasing a house is a bit more streamlined and a little bit more simpler. So if you can just touch over that
Absolutely.
and a couple things to look out for in that regard, then yeah, I really think that people would appreciate that.
Absolutely. So when you buy into Strata, you're basically buying a share into a larger company, basically.
Yep.
You're buying an ownership of one property inside many properties, and you and all the adjoining properties are basically holding hands. A nice way to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
However, the risk with buying into Strata is if a problem exists, you're buying into the problem. So what is the most important thing to do if you're buying into Strata is do your due diligence and ensure there's no problems.
Okay.
And when I say problems, I mean building issues, lack of finances in the Strata funds, anything to do with insurance. Make sure it's insured, because if you're buying into an apartment, make sure they've done, they're fully insured for the maximum amount possible.
Yep.
But something I've seen a lot with apartments is there's cladding issues, which could then warrant each of the Strata owners, so each of the unit owners, to then be required to fork out money to pay or rectify any issues that come up.
Yep.
So when you do buy into Strata, my number one tip is do your due diligence. Do a building and pest inspection. Order a Strata report. If you're buying a couple $100,000 property, do a Strata report. It will cost you $300, but it will be the most important $300 you ever spend when buying into Strata. Some of the most important things I would say is have a look at the Strata levy notice, because obviously when you buy into Strata, you're required to pay a fee basically to own that, and that obviously covers then the Strata bills, etc. But that Strata notice will tell you what the administration fund payment is. So when you look at a Strata levy notice, it would indicate for you what the Strata amount is per quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And most importantly, if you ever see the words special levies, just run.
Okay.
Run really fast, because special levies are a problem. Special levies usually indicate that all the property owners are required to fork out money and put money into it for something, because something needs to be rectified.
Okay.
I've purchased into Strata before, and I was one of the unlucky ones who had issues with the particular building, and seeing that and experiencing that firsthand, I really give a meticulous eye to anyone buying into Strata to ensure that they don't have to deal with those issues that I once dealt with, because they were not fun and they were very expensive.
Yeah.
So, of course, if you buy into Strata, look at the Strata report, do your building and pest inspection, have a solicitor review the Strata report, check the finances of the Strata fund. And I know this all sounds really complex, but it's not. There's nothing complex. A solicitor will be able to have a look at these records and tell you if the Strata fund has any issues or if the Strata has any problems that are coming up. And, there's simple ways where we can know those sort of things. I'm not saying Strata's bad. It's not. It's a great, it's wonderful. And it's buying into Strata or buying an apartment is where a lot of first home buyers purchase their first property. But it's just about doing the right thing and doing all the due diligence required.
And in relation to the people that don't really understand Strata reporting and all that sort of stuff, should they go to a solicitor that specialises in Strata or has some form of Strata experience, so they know that they're going to the right people, or any old solicitor or conveyancer be able to help with?
I think any solicitor or conveyancer will be able to assist. But I would also recommend to the purchaser that they make it very clear that they want the solicitor or the conveyancer to look at the Strata records or look at the Strata report and just run their eye over all that and provide some advice on it.
Yep. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And I think also talking to the Strata manager or the Strata inspector that actually compile that report is also important too, because they can be helpful in that
Absolutely.
regard as well.
Absolutely. And what someone may tell you over a phone call, they may not always put into a report. So it's really good,
Yeah.
comment.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So tell us a bit about this bargaining chip. So some buyers use it, some buyers know about it, some buyers don't. And that's the Section 66W.
Absolutely.
Is it advantageous to use it? What are your thoughts behind it? Is it a yes or a no for you, or a maybe?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So a Section 66W certificate, for those that don't know, is a certificate whereby a purchaser would waive their cooling off rights. So typically in any contract, you'd have a 5-day cooling off period, but for auctions are different. You don't get cooling off at auctions. So any standard contract that you sign, you should get a 5-day cooling off. But Section 66W certificate is like a super house power that a purchaser could use if they're ready to go. So what that means is if a purchaser really wants a property and they've done their due diligence and they know the building and pest is fine and they know their finance is fine, I would always say use it as a bargaining chip, because once you sign, you're required to then pay your deposit, which is a 10% by default on any contract unless negotiated otherwise. Once you sign, it's completely unconditional. There's no backing out. It's a benefit for the seller because it basically locks in the buyer. There's no opportunity to back out, and they get their full deposit paid there and then. I would definitely recommend it in circumstances where purchasers are ready. If they're ready and they've done their due diligence, by all means. But if you're not ready and you haven't done building and pest or you haven't got your finance sorted, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend using it in those circumstances.
So what you're saying is that if people have, say, some competition, they could essentially be ahead of the competition by having their due diligence and everything ready beforehand and use that as a negotiating tool, opposed to 10 or 20 other buyers that want a 5 or a 10-day cooling off period. That'll help them potentially secure the property.
Absolutely. I actually, funny enough, did it this week. I had a particular property that was going for auction on Saturday. And the purchasers who were my clients came along and said, we really, really, really want it, but we're scared of auction, as understandable. And we're happy to offer top dollar now. So I assisted them in negotiating that with the real estate agent, and we were able to negotiate for them a top dollar offer at asking price with a Section 66W certificate, paid on the provision that we were able to get a building and pest inspector out to the property that day. So we did. We had a building and pest inspector there at 1 p.m. He had a look. He provided a verbal report that everything was fine. They then signed on the dotted line a few hours later and they paid a 10%, and I signed a Section 66W certificate, which allowed them to purchase that property at auction conditions, but pre-auction. So it was they were stoked, their first home buyers, and they were so happy because they were able to get the property they want without going through all the stress of an auction.
So they literally didn't have to compete against anyone on the day for 5,000 here, 5,000 there, and pay an extra $100,000. They got to negotiate beforehand.
Exactly. So it was a nice win for them because they really wanted this particular one, and they could afford what the asking price said, and we were able to get that across the line, which was was a bit of a win for us.
So it was like a mini auction, but they were betting against themselves.
Something like that.
And I guess they were able to bypass that roller coaster too. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in terms of your role, what do you enjoy the most about it?
I think assisting the clients with the most important thing that they do, which is usually buy or sell property. I think it's a really awesome thing to get into. And if you're able to buy or sell property, like it's probably one of the biggest things some people do. So for me to be able to handhold in that process and make the legal stuff a little bit more friendly and kinder and a bit, be a little bit more approachable than some solicitors, then I like being part of that process. I think it's one of the funnest areas of law, in my opinion, and It's one of the most enjoyable. I get to help people with the most exciting part of their lives. So I definitely say I do enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you take that to the next level by going helping them out with auctions and all these other sorts of things. So it seems like you really enjoy what you do.
Thank you. I do. I like to go out of my way for my people.
And you have to, because then that'll come back to you. Then they're going to say, oh my God, Ren did this for me. She's awesome. You should use her. And then you'll potentially get 10 leads out of just being a good person and doing your job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Um,
So I think one of
that's
the
awesome.
issues,
Yeah.
one of the topics you've forgotten to speak about.
Oh, stamp duty. Oh, thanks for.
What is stamp duty?
So stamp duty is the tax you would pay to Revenue New South Wales or to the government when you're purchasing property. So everyone pays stamp duty on the purchase price, and there's a stamp duty calculator on Revenue New South Wales whereby people can type in the purchase price and it will tell them what stamp duty they're required to pay. Some of the benefits in New South Wales for first home buyers, and a first home buyer is someone who has never purchased property before, is over 18, is an Australian citizen, and has an intention to live at the property for 6 months in the first 12 months, is entitled to claim for the first home buyer's stamp duty exemption. If you are purchasing a property, so a physical property that you can see, then the amount whereby the limit is to claim free stamp duty is $650,000. So there's lots of properties out there that meet that quota, whether it's an apartment or a townhouse or something a little bit more regional. There's definitely lots of properties that would meet that. However, if you purchase a property between $650 and $800, you're then entitled to a discount from stamp duty, which is a really good discount when you work it out, when you work out the numbers. Another benefit for first home buyers is if you buy brand new, which is a property that's never been lived in before, strictly brand new, then the limit is then increased to $750,000. And you also get a $10,000 grant from the Australian government because you're buying a brand new property and you're a first home buyer. So there's some really, really great benefits out there. And I would strongly recommend anyone that doesn't know these benefits to come to me for some assistance or some guidance, or even simple Google searching will do the trick as well. And Google First Home Buyers Scheme New South Wales and have a look at what you're entitled to, because the entitlements are great. They're massive. And if you're a first home buyer buying your first property, getting free stamp duty and a $10,000 grant, that might really help buyers in knowing what they're looking for. They might turn around and say, great, I want brand new because I get those extra few benefits. And that $10,000 grant will furnish my apartment or my house or whatever it is. So definitely do your research and ask the right questions to make sure that if you are a first home buyer, you may be entitled to the First Home Buyers Assistance Scheme, and definitely do your research just to know exactly what those entitlements are and making sure you can dip into it. Those entitlements are there. They're an entitlement. If you're an Australian citizen, you're over 18 and you're going to live in the property and you've never owned property before, definitely try and make sure your property search is aligned in one of those things, and therefore you get, a really great benefit at the end, being a concession or an exemption from stamp duty.
Yeah, I think that 650K mark is really probably the hot price point for apartments in Sydney, because a lot of people can get a 2-3 bedroom apartment for that price, and they can get the 10 grand back, as you said, to furnish the apartment, but also they don't have to pay stamp duty. A 650 place, you're probably looking at 15 to 20K stamp duty. So
That's right.
That's going to take the average person 2 years to save up. So instead of having to wait, it's a really good opportunity for people to not buy the dream house straight away, but just buy something that's affordable, take advantage of the grants. If the government's throwing money at you, then
absolutely,
you should be getting on board and taking it.
Couldn't have said it better. Absolutely. Then I'd say that to all my clients. If buying something a little bit smaller is an option, do it.
Yeah.
If buying something a little bit further out is an option to get this, to be entitled to the scheme, do it. That you only get these benefits once. You can never get a first home buyer's benefit more than once, so you might as well use it when you're entitled to it.
And with the way the regional market's going, people can move out to your Hunter Valleys, your Central West, things like that for 6 to 650 Central Coast out to Wollongong Narroways, and you can purchase houses for that. But if people want to live in Sydney still, there's a lot of apartment options as well. Then they can pay that house down, gain some equity. Then once they've got the equity, then they can use that to upgrade, sell that house, and then move into the dream house essentially, instead of trying to save and get away from that Australian dream.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the budget was announced a couple of days ago, and they were talking about increasing positions for people to be able to access these grants. So I think it bumped up. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, because you did a YouTube piece on this earlier. 5,000 spots to, what was it, 35,000? Correct me if I'm wrong.
There's now going to be 35,000 spots out as of 1st of October because they exhausted all the old ones.
Mm-hmm.
So now they've found that the budget has increased and the actual amounts of grants are even more. So between now and the 1st of October, they're going to exhaust all the current grants, but also bring out up to 35,000 new ones.
Yeah.
So these first-time owner grants are going to be phenomenal for the rest of the year. But also they're talking about with the build and things like that going up to $950,000.
That's awesome.
Which is brilliant.
Awesome, because the property prices are only going up. So if the schemes are lifted as well, it means more purchasers are able to tap into those schemes.
Well, that's the thing. You know, 950 in Sydney 2 years ago was you had to get some. It was very achievable in a lot of places. Now 950 is if you want a house, you've got to come out to our area. You can't buy that close to the city or anything like that anymore. So if people don't want the units and things like that, they have to increase the limits so they can facilitate the first home buyers as well.
Absolutely. And I think in saying that, having the right people in your corner when you are purchasing a property is just of utmost important. Having the right lawyer, the broker, the buyer's agent, those people in your corner, because they can guide you and they can give you the right advice so that you know where you're heading, and so that you've got an opportunity, if there is an opportunity in a particular scheme with a 5% deposit and things like that. Having the right professionals in your corner would be able to just direct you a little bit better. And for anyone listening on these podcasts, I think you're already doing the right thing, because it's definitely not something I did as a first home buyer. Yeah. So I think for people doing this, you're already on the right track. But definitely tap into your resources, which is tap into those who are offering assistance and guidance, and take their knowledge and use it, because there's so many great schemes out there. If you can tap into one of them, you're already ahead.
Yeah, and it's sort of like a sports team, isn't it? Like, example, we'll use a soccer analogy here. If you just had Ronaldo, yeah, he may score a few goals, but you don't have a defender, you don't have a goalkeeper, you don't have anything, and he might score 2 goals, but he might let in 10. So he's essentially lost. Where if you have a half-decent goalkeeper and some other good players, Ronaldo can keep scoring goals and continue to do that. So if you have the right team around you, you can play ball.
Awesome. Yeah, really good analogy. I love the soccer.
All right. Horror stories, Renee. I'm sure that you've experienced quite a few in your career thus far. So if you could share a couple for us, just so our audience can kind of know the do's and don'ts.
So one of the don'ts, don't go to an auction and don't bid if you haven't had a contract reviewed by a solicitor.
Right.
So here's the story.
Can't you just rock up and bid?
Absolutely
why not?
not. Absolutely
like on the
not.
TV, you just put your hands up, 50, 100,000. That's how it works, doesn't it?
Unfortunately, no. But there was a bit of a horror story. I had a client attend an auction recently. She was not my client before the auction. She became my client at the auction. And she was there happily bidding, and she was successful. And came to sign on the dotted line, and the real estate agent asked her, "Who's your solicitor?" And she said, "Oh, I don't have one." And he said, "Well, you haven't had the contract reviewed?" And she then responded, "No." And he was like, "I think you should call someone right now." And he gave her my number, and I spoke to the client, and funny enough, I'd already reviewed this particular contract, which was lucky. I was able to provide some sound advice on a Saturday afternoon and just guide her a little bit. But in those circumstances, she needed a 5% deposit, and she had not negotiated that prior, which means you're bound by the contract, which says 10%. Lucky for her in those circumstances, we were able to get online, and I was able to send an email out to solicitors on a Saturday who were not going to read it until Monday morning. But we were able to try in good faith and negotiate some of the conditions. And may I say, that's not always how it works. You know, it doesn't work like that in the real world. You need to have that stuff sorted well before auction. But in those circumstances, we were lucky that she was able to try and negotiate a 5%. We're able to try and negotiate some of the terms. But the horror story there is, if she was successful there and then and couldn't get her hands on a solicitor who could deal with it there and then, she's liable to pay 10% there and then. No questions, not on Monday, there and then. She's required to transfer or provide a check for a 10% of the purchase price. So definitely a horror story, because if she was not able to do that as quickly as, we did, then in those circumstances she'd be forking out money that she didn't have, or going to the bank of mum and dad, or it's quite a scary situation to be in. So I'd never want anyone to go through that. So definitely do your due diligence beforehand.
Yeah, and I think that's the key with auctions. Like, a lot of people don't realise what's involved in it. They think it's normal conditions. There'll just be a few other people there bidding. There'll be a bit of competition, but they don't realise that when you get it on auction day, you can't back out. That's it. You have to pay the 10%.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And if you're successful at auction, you're bound by the terms of that auction. There's no terminating or rescinding or walking away.
So essentially, if she couldn't get into a solicitor that day or you weren't there, she would have had to pay that 10%. And
Yes.
if it didn't go ahead, she could have lost the property and they could have resold it again.
Or she would have also been liable to be sued for that 10%.
Yeah, wow.
You're successful at auction and terms and conditions are 10%, you have to put down that money unless you negotiate prior for a 5% deposit. So it's really important people understand that this isn't any playing field. It's serious law life and you need to do things properly. So definitely do your due diligence
By the
beforehand.
book.
Yeah, it's not The Sims. You can't just build a property yourself with a button and then live in it or whatever. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks, Renee. We'll wrap this up. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and it was awesome. And I think our viewers can get a bit more of an insight of why to use a solicitor and why not to do it themselves. Just like trying to do your own plumbing, it's probably a bad idea.
Yeah, I definitely don't do my own plumbing, Dan. Last time I tried, just wasn't a pretty sight. So, definitely get your own solicitor or conveyancer. And thank you very much to Renee from Fizzini Lawyers.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure being here with you.